Well, voila, you've got yourself a resonance fixer. Let's check it against Soothe 2. Today we're going to take a look at another popular spectral balancing plugin, Gullfoss by Soundtheory. Let's get right to it. But first, please like and subscribe. Hit that bell button to get notifications for new shows, and please watch to the end to hear my conclusion. Gullfoss is an interesting beast. Like many of the spectral correction plugins I've been reviewing lately, Gullfoss claims to help clear up problems with mixes and tracks with a proprietary EQ process. The emphasis with Gullfoss seems to be more on increasing clarity and solving masking issues rather than resonances, like with Oeksound Soothe 2, although as we'll see, I think it can be used for that as well. Gullfoss employs a unique technology called the computational auditory perception model, developed by an actual real physicist. Soundtheory have emphasized that this is not an artificial intelligence or a dynamic EQ. It's more like an EQ that adjusts itself constantly, up to 300 times per second, while maintaining phase coherence and increasing clarity in the source. Basically, Gullfoss has a formula to make things sound better. Bold claims. Let's dive in and check it out. The interface settings can be a little hard to understand at first. Here's what you need to know about Gullfoss. Recover. You can turn this up if you want to bring up details that are hard to hear, say like a swampy kick drum. Tame. You can turn this up to control frequencies that are getting out of hand and dominating the mix, such as too many mid-range guitars. Bias. This tilts the EQ towards recover or tame. This is probably the hardest control to understand. Soundtheory says this should be used when you're not totally sure if you want more recover or more tame. Like many things in Gullfoss, you just kind of have to tweak it and see what works. Brighten. This is more straightforward. If you hear the EQ is getting too bright or dark, you can compensate with this setting. Boost. This raises the low end and softens the mid-range. This goes below 0, so you can do the opposite. Roll off low end and raise the mid-range. So you can probably guess that these are powerful mixing and especially mastering tools. Let's hear Gullfoss in action. So I've got a full mix here that's pretty much done, but I feel like it needs that last 5 to 10% of polish. There's a bit of low and mid-range action going on that is masking things in certain places. I'll start with recover. And I can hear the kick drum seems to come up a bit. Let's raise this further. And we can hear that low end really comes up there. I actually kind of like what it's doing here. Let's bypass. That's a pretty big difference. I have a reference track here. Let's A/B with that. And here's the track with no Gullfoss. Gullfoss back on. Okay, I'm going to lower the recover a bit. This sounds a little unnatural. Okay, so I like what Gullfoss has brought into this. But it does sound a little dark now. Let's add some tame into the mix. Okay, so this seems to add a little more mid-range information and high-end to the mix. We can adjust the high-end over here with the brighten control. That's pretty sensitive. A little goes a long way with this. Things can get pretty dark or bright quickly. Bring the tame down a bit. Leave that around -4. Okay, so I think this is sounding a little clearer. The mix actually sounds a little warmer, with instruments sitting a little better in the mix. But check out the break. This is where I heard the most dramatic difference. All the instruments drop out and some strings come in here. Check that out. You hear all that detail come back in on the strings? Wow. That's great. I really like that. What I find fascinating is that when I bypass it, the mid-range in the vocal seems to jump out more. Then when I activate it, the vocal curls back into the mix, fighting with the guitar less. The mix sounds more glued. Let's check it out. It's subtle, but this is pretty powerful. It'd be something to be careful of. If you overdo this, you could sink the vocal too far back into the mix. Lastly, we have the boost control. My initial guess was that this was some type of maximizer, but it's more like a smile EQ curve, kind of a Fletcher Munson curve. Boost is the bass, cutting the mids, and I think a little bump in the highs. Yeah, the mix already has plenty of lows. Let's keep this maybe at like a 1 dB. AB with the reference. Again, we're not trying to get this mix to sound exactly like Coldplay or anything, but just kind of give me an idea of what I'm going for. And I think this gets it closer to it. Another great feature, which I'm not going to miss this time, is that you have vertical handles on each side that limit processing. I think Gullfoss might be processing the highs a little too aggressively, so I'm going to drag this handle in. And we can see, you can actually see the processing coming down here. There, that sounds better. You can do the same with the low end. If you're happy with your low end, you can tell Gullfoss not to touch that. And you can even invert these, so the processing is only happening in the margins. Great if you're really happy with the mix already and you just want to do stuff on the outsides of it. Something else to note, the correlation meter right below the spectral display shows you if your processing is making the signal brighter or darker than the original. This is really helpful to keep track of how drastic your overall changes are. The meters on the right show you how much recover and tame is happening to the mix. And just to the right of that is the net effect of both tame and recover. So both tame and recovering can be happening at the same time, but that kind of overall global effect on the mix is shown on the leftmost correlation meter. There, so in a few moves, we can take a mix and punch it up a bit. Pretty exciting. Let's quickly try this out on my ongoing comparison with Soothe 2. And no Pale Blue Dot video would be complete without a Soothe 2 comparison. So here's that guitar from my other videos with the nasty 3K resonance. Let's insert Gullfoss and crank the tame setting. Let's bypass. That's a lot better. I'm going to restrict the processing to the problem area. Try to retain more of the guitar's natural tone. Voila, you've got yourself a resonance fixer. Let's check it against Soothe 2. So what's the final word on Gullfoss? I will admit that initially I was a little confused and underwhelmed with Gullfoss when I first tried it out. The results can be quite subtle, which I'm sure is not what some of us had in mind when we want something like an intelligent EQ to fix our problems for us. But I think it's that subtlety and graceful power that makes this a truly valuable plugin. In the end, I would be reaching for this most often for mastering purposes, as in my first example. This can really help with that last 5 to 10% of the master. Do some light balancing that can help it translate better to listeners. I found it useful on single instruments too, but it's on complex program material that it truly shines. Now this is a plugin that's priced for professionals at $200 American, so keep that in mind when deciding if this is right for you. Possibly more than any other spectral balancing plugin I've used, with Gullfoss you have to listen and dial in and balance the signal yourself. Even though it's doing its 300 EQ calculations per second, you still need to tell it when that's too much or too little, because the controls are simple, but unusual. Again, I recommend beginners stick with learning EQ and mixing fundamentals before shelling out $200 for a quick fix that might disappoint them. But I encourage everyone to try the demo and see if it works for you. For me, it's become an indispensable part of my mastering chain, giving that final bit of clarity on mixes and masters. That's all for this episode. Thanks so much for watching. Please like and subscribe and hit that bell.